You had mentioned that Freemasonry underwent a great change during the American Civil War. Um, can you expand a little on what you meant? For example, what was it changed into and who changed it?
Well, originally those particular beings you consider Freemasons today were keeping traditions and cultural artifacts from the time of the Templars and other secret societies that you might be aware of due to the persecution from the church, like the experience of other beings like the Khazars or Templars themselves and other of those groups that were have to go into hiding in order to be burned alive. However, after it became independent and the church was no longer powerful, it was infiltrated by other forces that decided to use it more in a different sense of not keeping certain information from the public in order not to be burned, but rather to have an advantage over the public. So there was some form of corruption, which mostly includes the higher rankings of those organizations. But with this group or the Illuminati group or any other secret societies you might be aware of, there's not just pure evil and the desire to control. A lot of those people think they're doing the right thing. And of course, only top levels are even aware that there is such a secret behind it. And it doesn't necessarily have something to do with the American Civil War, it was just around that time.
Okay. So again, what did it change into, and who changed it?
Well, the people that were at that time in control of it, the people that were highest ranking in there, and there was also a collaboration between different religious sects that had basically moved within those ranks that decided they would like to use it for something else than just keeping this knowledge. So what it was changed into was no longer a treasure, for example, of this knowledge, but rather a tool to influence politics, to influence rich people, more perhaps like your Bilderbergs groups, where just people come together, not necessarily need to remember secret formulas, etc. More like an old man's club or whatever words you're using for such things. Take, for example, the difference between the Rosicrucians on the one hand and the Rotary Club on the other hand. More who knows who. If you're very well aware, you're influenced a lot by the people that you're with. So in order, if you get a lot of people with power and money in your world in one particular group and you can get them all on the same track, you can exercise much greater control over society than, for example, one person could, even if they had a lot of power and money. It's it's really not that complicated. It's not a lot of secret knowledge in order to manipulate people's mind with high tech. It is a very simple principle, which is very effective. And yes, there's also some perhaps darker elements in some of those groups that practice human sacrifice, but it's only a fringe, so to speak, that went on to one particular extreme.
Okay. And so what were the teachings from the Knights Templar that the Freemasons were originally trying to preserve?
A lot of that had to do with religious aspects that in today's world would not play much of an important role anymore along the people that you believe to be Jesus, for example. We already talked about that person another time. There was perhaps another version of history that back then would have been a great impact to the church. Then there was information about extraterrestrial heritage on your planet and heritage of your so-called gods and of course, just simple things that back then, however, were dynamite, as you call it. Like that the Earth is much older than just 6,000 of years, and it's just a part of a bigger cosmos. Those ideas, which then later, and when church lost its power, came to the surface anyways through other groups. However, there was also a knowledge of the extraterrestrial heritage, which to this very day has not come out to the surface, despite the church losing its power, because it shifted again to those particular groups which then infiltrated beings like the people in Freemasonic societies and the people that were behind your so-called humanism.
Okay.
And, well, the original identity of who you are as a species. There was also a lot of information in your so-called Kabbalah and other form of mysticism. A lot of the information they also got from the Ismailites in Iran, with whom they had contact, who in turn had gotten it down from ancient Greeks and ancient Egyptians much before that, who had got the information from Atlantis. It just kept going that way. There were always certain secretive castes involved. The Templars were just one among many that kept the information. And Freemasonry later became another one, which again was then corrupted because after the church breakdown, there was no longer the possibility to safely discard of people. So they decided to infiltrate it. You have a similar event happening right now with your so-called internet that cannot be controlled by those sources who are now deciding to instead to infiltrate it. It is a natural, normal process between different groups that try to gain power. Again, very often your so-called conspiracies are really not that complicated. Very often it's just about power. And in this instance, of course, knowledge is power because if you base your power on a certain form of information and keep other information from people, you can much easier control them. Your television sets, for example, are designed for that. And the Templars were also keeping some information about your monetary system. This is why they didn't take interest from the people. Which then later on led, of course, to some becoming very rich because they understood how the system worked, which then also funneled into the Freemasons, who used the same principles for the same reason again, and before they became corrupted and decided to use it for the opposite end. But this happened to literally all societies on your planet. They were either crushed, or they had to go underground, or even leave the planet at some point, or they were simply infiltrated.
Okay. So today, are the Freemasons and the Illuminati basically just the same group?
Well, their name has been used for different groups. Your so-called Illuminati or Freemasonry, official Illuminati order didn't exist much longer, but it changed into something else and it split off. It's the same with your political parties. Sometimes they split off and they form a new party, or they change the voter base, or other changes occur and it's still keeping the same name, and sometimes they change the name, or otherwise they remain the same, or the people from one group move to another group, one club to another, and it's the same people, but it's another club. So this is also happening in your so-called secret society. It's not just one line. It's much more confusing, perhaps, but at the same time, it's very common on your political or religious arena as well. So there are the Freemasonic groups, yes, that are very much on the same agenda, and others that are something completely different. There are some Illuminati members that are perhaps more satanic, and others that are completely different. It's not just one big monolithic front that all wants the same.
Okay.
Same out here, of course, out in the cosmos. We are not all part of one big organization.
So it seems like the Freemasons have a bunch of different sects and they don't have one leader, but does the Illuminati have one leader, like a king or a queen or something?
Well, again, this word has been used for different groups. Originally, it was one group at Pike that split off later on and became something else, but there was already a group before that that changed into something else. Certain groups from different religions that already existed before that had infiltrated Judaism, Christianity, and Islam most effectively, even though they also had some success in infiltrating others. And when those secret societies came about, they simply infiltrated them as well. So it greatly depends what exactly you would call such. They're different groups, and they all have one leader, and the others have another leader, and they're in competition with each other, and sometimes they're in agreement with each other. It is still politics to a large degree. And yes, certainly there are certain families, more than one person, that have more power in those than others.
Okay. So, have most Freemasonic and Illuminati groups pledged their loyalty to the Draconian Empire?
No, it is not that they pledged their loyalty, they just reached out to find who is most powerful that they could attach to, and that's what they found.
Okay,
A lot of the members of those groups are also not aware of that themselves. But that's something that I personally also don't have the insight in that perhaps the reptiles have.
okay. So, do these groups have total control over the U.S. military and intelligence agencies?
Well, depends what you consider total control. They certainly did all their efforts, but there are still many individuals in those agencies that have no idea that all of this is going on. If they knew, they would likely rebel. So it's not that there's total loyalty, but in one way or the other, they do have certain control because of the monetary system, because people are willing to do a lot of things if their paycheck is threatened. So they have the top positions under control, and if all the foot soldiers, so to speak, would rebel, they would lose power because the foot soldiers, if I can term them that, are not aware of any of this going on from what I'm aware of. But it's still questionable how they would behave if they knew.
Right.
Your species is unpredictable even for me, or especially for me as an outsider. How you behave in certain situations of shock is interesting, which is why we observe you, but sometimes still unpredictable from my perspective.
Right. So, how much control do they have over U.S. police departments and the criminal justice system?
It is not that sheriffs or individual departments somewhere are under total control. They have to answer to them, but it's more that the higher up, so to speak. I'm familiar with all the terms in your police terminology. But for example, the CIA or the FBI are certainly under stronger control of them than an individual police department somewhere in a small town in the United States. Again, it's the top levels. The lower levels usually have no idea of who they're working for. They're just working for what they believe is right, and perhaps also in many cases just for their paycheck or their family, etc. And they don't care much about those power structures. So the individual police officer on the street that you see likely has no idea about any of this.
Okay. Is the Federal Reserve really a construct of the Illuminati and Freemasons that was created to have control of the monetary system?
It's most certainly a scenario that's likely, at least since it comes to those sects, yes, again, not all of those Illuminati, Freemason, those words you're using, all they apply to a number of groups, but those that have the strongest foothold in the financial sector have established this particular institution, but also others like the European Central Bank and also ones in communist countries such as China, where they established a certain foothold with for this very reason they could basically buy the country and print money.
Okay. Now, I assume the Washington Monument obelisk and the layout of the streets of Washington, D.C., and a pentagram are symbols of the Freemasons and Illuminati, but do you know what they gain by this? I mean, is it just for their own amusement, or do they gain power from these symbols?
Well, there are different groups on your planet that are running secret societies. Again, not just one evil power structure who wants to have power over everybody else. There are different groups that have their own agendas. Many of them simply place their what you consider as in your office environment, their cards, their identity cards. They just or raise a flag, so to speak. They cannot fly a flag from the capital, perhaps, but they can build monuments like that. And obviously, the obelisk goes back to certain groups in ancient Egypt, from where much of the information that was later infiltrating your so-called Middle East and Southern Europe, like Rome and Greece, where the knowledge first surfaced before your Abrahamic religions tried to take control of it, came from originally. And of course, symbols like the pentagram have also been used by secret societies a long time ago. The name Hollywood, for example, is also not a coincidence. The holy tree is something that was used by secret societies many thousands of years ago.
So,
You have many of those symbols, especially in your newer countries that were following those principles.
speaking of Hollywood, how much control do the Illuminati and Freemasons have over it?
Well, you keep using those words. It's not necessarily the Illuminati or the Freemasons, but I understand what you mean, and they have total control. It's perhaps one of the most controlled areas on your entire planet.
Okay.
After all, this is mostly what's engineering mind control in your world more than anything else. It's producing, I think it's also considered a dream factory from what I'm aware of. In many ways, that is more than multifaceted. Your dreams in your world, your subconscious mind, where you enter a higher dimension are to a large degree influenced on what you vibrate on the frequency. And that in turn can be easily controlled by your electronics, especially subliminal messaging. But another area is perhaps just as controlled as your Wall Street area. So in your own country, those are perhaps two areas that are the most controlled. The Midwest, for example, would not be that control, or the Bible Belt, for example, as those have still something more perhaps a wider Wild West attitude, or the more traditional, what you consider Christian ideals that are more in the control of still the church or their offshoots. And again, there are different groups that have their different control structures, not just one group that wants the same thing. And they're also in competition with each other. But the ones that have taken over the monetary system and basically infiltrated the Freemasonic sects to take over the control from the church into their own hands, and in some cases they're also the same people. They are perhaps the ones that are most strongest currently in your Western world, and this Hollywood and the Wall Street area that is likely their stronghold. But Hollywood, of course, being a very old tradition in terms of mind control, it's just that they're using technology now while they used different methods a long time ago, hundreds of years ago, before your country was founded. Most of those came from Great Britain, however.
Okay.
Most of those also use methods that were used by Freemasons originally, which they later used for their own benefit, but the Freemasons were just keeping them still from older tradition, not just from the Templars, but even dating back to Celtic days.
Okay. So about the pentagram street layout in Washington D.C., do you know if it's intended to be a satanic symbol?
That depends greatly what you consider satanic. It is an old symbol in many cultures, and it first and foremost represents the five elements. And if you put it on top or on the bottom, it can be different meanings. But a lot of people read something else in there. There are different concepts in your spiritual region. Some you consider more lightful, and some you consider darker. But there are many different aspects to it. It has been used by many circles on your societies that have been much older than your modern religions. Some of them were considered satanic later. Again, symbols have been used on your planet very often to signify power, like an identity card, but the people using them nonetheless have changed.
Right.
Same as with your cross, for example.
So do you know, I mean, as you may know, the pentagram in Washington, D.C. points at the White House. I mean, do you know what the symbolism is? Is it kind of saying like the White House is under the control of, I don't know, not necessarily Satan, but whatever. Do you know what the message is?
Yes, under control of a certain group of people
Okay.
that made the layout of the city. It is definitely symbol. It's not a coincidence if that's what you're hinting at. Yes, it has deliberately been laid out that way. Many of your cities have been structured that way, not just in the United States.
Okay.
There's also a reason that the city of London is laid out the way it is, or the Vatican.
Okay.